Getting comfortable with creating your own builds in Deadlock, to me, is a great way to really experience the game in really its most full sense and to enjoy playing the game even more. But it can be really, really daunting, especially for new players. Hey everyone, this is Connor here at Dead Unlocked, and if you're a new subscriber, you might think all we do here is news, but I also really want to dive into things like build guides, character guides, item guides, like kind of more of the how to play the game in the best way kind of content. And so I want to start a series where we're going to go through kind of how to build each type of build in Deadlock. So how to do a spirit build is what we're going to do today, and then later we'll do how to do a weapon build, how to do vitality builds. There's some oversimplification going on here a little bit, like you don't sometimes purely just build spirit, weapon, vitality. We're going to talk about all that, but especially if you're a newer player and you're coming to Deadlock, like I said, creating your own builds can feel really, really daunting. So I want to make as simple of a step-by-step as possible. We're actually going to go about creating a build for 7 live here. So I've kind of got the template for the build. We're going to be doing an ult build here, and I want to talk through kind of my process for doing builds in Deadlock and how I think you can do builds pretty easily in this game as well. And like I said, if you're coming to this video and you're a newer subscriber, actually I think one of the first videos I ever made on the channel was like a 45-minute video on how to make builds in Deadlock and a really kind of overview guide. I would recommend going there if you want just a more general kind of how to make builds guide. But like I said, we're going to focus on Spirit today. And like I said, we've picked a Spirit hero. We're going to do 7 for this build. And how I like to do builds in general is I like to go, maybe I'm a smooth brain, I don't know, but I like to keep my builds really simple, 1 screen, 4 categories, early, mid, late, and situational. So this is kind of how I always like to start my builds when I go to make them. And I actually tend to like to reverse engineer my builds. So for this, I would say that is step 1. So with a Spirit build in particular, you want to kind of decide at each point in the game, what are your big spikes? So I like to have a mid-game spike and a late-game spike whenever I'm doing builds. You know, sometimes it doesn't work out cleanly like that, and the other piece of this is decide what abilities you want to scale, or what ability, if there's just one that you want to scale with Spirit. And this is really important for Spirit builds in general because, for example, 7 has 3 abilities that, 4 technically, that deal Spirit damage, but 3 really heavy hitters. He has his Lightning Ball, which is, that does some ticking damage there. He obviously has the stun, but it's really a little bit less of what we're talking about here. He has Power Surge here, and then he has Storm Surge with his 4, which is obviously the ult with the Lightning Strike. So those are the 4 things that 7 does, and each of those abilities kind of have a little bit different of, a way that you would go about building them. So Lightning Ball, for example, would be benefited by having lots of charges and lots of abilities to kind of spam those balls out constantly, right? Power Surge would be a little bit different. Storm Surge would be a little different from there. And also, building a 7 Spirit build is much different than building like a Grey Talon Spirit build. So, Grey Talon is looking for single target burst, insane single damage, might call for items like Spirit Burn, Mystic Reverb, even like a Boundless Spirit in there, right? So like that's what Talon might build, but 7 is not going to necessarily be looking for those same items all the time. So as we talk about this, I want to put all that in perspective before we get to the build. Know what hero you're building, and then know what ability you're trying to build within that hero. I think if you're going to do a Spirit build in Deadlock, you have to start by answering those questions. All right, so for this build, again, I'm going to be doing an ult build for this. We'll get to ability points later, but I will at least want to start with items here. So the goal of this build is going to be, for me, to have as large of an ult as possible in the mid to late game, to be able to cover huge areas, defend walkers, attack walkers, cover all of base if we're pushing into base, or defend base if we're behind in the game. So, like I said, I would want to start off with what I would call my late game core items, and then I like to build backwards, because this is where we're going to try to get to. Let's start there and then figure out what steps we need to take to get to that point, essentially. So, Escalating Exposure is a great 7 ult item, I think. You have -8 Spirit Resist on Spirit damage, plus 17 Spirit Resist for just the item. And then you have a passive that's obviously, as you deal more and more ticking Spirit damage, it applies a stacking Spirit amp that allows you to do more. So as you're doing more damage, which is great for 7's ult, because it's just kind of constantly ticking, again, very different than like a Grey Talon build. Grey Talon would never use this. But it's great on 7. Another item I would probably put in here that I'm just now remembering, I didn't prepare it for, is probably Lightning Scroll. So I'd probably have Lightning Scroll in this mix as well, maybe even in front of Transcendent Cooldown. Boundless Spirit is the next one. We just want to be dealing as much damage as possible. This one could even be a little bit lower prio. Lightning Scroll, Transcendent Cooldown. I also put a couple items in the mid game because right now the way I think about it is these 2 items would help me a ton to kind of achieve the the means to the end, right? And they would be helpful in the mid game. They're lower cost items. They're 3,200, but they do the same thing. But however, right now, this is just 6 spirit items. They kind of just exist in a vacuum right now. They're really not that useful, because if I just had these 6 items, I wouldn't be in a good place. I would have no vitality, no weapon, and I would obviously have no building blocks kind of along the way. I'm obviously starving in the early and mid game right now. There's nothing there. So let's kind of look. I'll take a break. Let's fill in some gaps, and then we'll come back and talk about it. All right, so now what we've gone through and done here is we've just essentially found all of the items that build into our late game items. So these are all the things that potentially we could run as far as the build goes. Buying these are going to contribute towards what you're trying to achieve with these 4 items, because these are just the components of them organized by cost, essentially. This is how I generally like to start off the build. Now, let me just say right now, this is not a final draft. We're not going to be buying all these items probably, because sometimes you just skip to the thing that you're going to build eventually. You don't build the previous piece of it because you need something else with that money. And so this is where we need to break down the game by phase. This is a really important step in this, because if this is all I bought in the early game, I'm not going to be having very much fun. My gun's going to do nothing. I'm going to die really easily. 7 is, after months of nerfs, is one of the easier to kill heroes right now in the early game. If you can get onto him, it's not good for 7. So this is not going to work for the early game. So we're going to have to peel some of this back and ask ourselves some questions about what items we really need along the way. And so that's kind of a pruning process I want to talk about, because this reverse engineering tactic we're doing is good. It gives you kind of a goalpost, but how you get to that goalpost is really important for understanding how Deadlock works, because it's not just about build your components along the way. There's other things you need along the way, and there's kind of a give and take, a patience that might come along with doing this, right? So for example, duration extender is a really interesting one. It's 1600. All it does is it gives you, on one imbued ability, 22% ability duration. Now that's a pretty big chunk. That's a quarter of the ability extended, right? The question we have to ask is that important, or is where is it? Superior duration important? So superior duration is 1600 additional for 8% bullet resist and an extra 6% ability duration across all your abilities and items. Now, what we're doing here is we're trying to make an ult build that's as strong as possible, and 7 really doesn't get a whole lot of value out of having extended duration on other items. So what I would probably do here, honestly, just off the cuff, is I would remove superior duration, I would move duration extender here, and that would free up a slot right away. Because we really don't need the duration on all abilities. So we're trying to kind of cut out things and be as efficient as possible in where we're allocating our souls to get the most value out of our singular goal, which is, like I said, create a devastating ultimate in the mid to late game that can wreak havoc. So we'll continue to do that with all these other items as we go along. But the other thing we need to be doing simultaneously is we need to answer the question, what am I doing in the game in the meantime? Because I can't do those devastating ults in the early game and even the kind of the early part of the mid game. So what items can we be building during that phase to support the rest of my gameplay? What abilities am I going to be focusing on in the meantime? Let me plug in some items. We'll hop right back in. All right, so in the meantime, what are we doing in the early and mid game? I put a few items down here to at least start to ask some questions about what else can be useful in this build. How are we actually achieving kind of the means to the end that we want to do? So let's look at a few of these items that I have down here and kind of discuss why I have them down here, how you might look to slot them into this build, what should you do versus not, what's situational versus core in a build like this. Because what we have in terms of what's on the board already, you could argue, I mean, we're going to pick this apart a little bit more as we go, but this is kind of the beginnings of our core items in this build, the items we think we really need to run this every single game that we run it. But there's got to be more than just the spirit items, right? This is a spirit build, but there's more to the build that we need. So what green items do we supplement in this game? Are there any green items that belong in the late game, or should we just get those out of the way in the early to mid game while we're getting our ultimate online slowly? All important questions. So I would start off by kind of talking about the early game and a couple gun and health items or vitality items that I would consider. Namely, I have a few options here. So extra regen early is very good. It's a great, safe item. You can buy in lane. If you're weaker in lane like 7 is, this can help you just passively to stay alive, be more of a supporter in lane, especially if you're paired up with a Mirage and you're kind of taking the brunt of the aggression while the Mirage is poking, then this can be a great item. You're kind of a passenger in that lane anyway, so just do your role support. Extra stamina is a little bit the same way. This one also builds into a few good items like Arcane Surge, Stamina Mastery, ones that you could legitimately use later in the game, whereas extra regen you're probably just selling. I hate items that I'm just kind of selling in the game. It never feels great to me. So I'm going to actually go ahead and take extra regen out. I just would prefer not to use an item that I have to sell if I can avoid it. Now, on the same note, though, the 2 weapon items I have here are almost definitely getting sold as well. Restorative Shot, Monster Rounds. Monster Rounds is one of those items you could buy almost every game, and you're probably not going to ever regret it, at least not seriously. It's going to help you clear wave, it's going to help you farm later in the game. Like, it just helps for a lot of different things, and you could hold off on selling this one for a really, really long time. I like it better than Restorative Shot. If you're a Restorative Shot user, though, totally understand you putting that in the spot instead. I'll take Restorative Shot out. So let's go ahead and move Monster Rounds and extra stamina up to the top. Now what we have here is we have some choices to make in the early game, because really this probably can't be a full-on early game. This starts to get a little bit dicey, especially if we're imbuing compressed cooldown. We'll get to that in a second, but let's say we took this out for now. We'll put it down here just for sake of clearing out the top. If this was your legitimate early game of 7, 5 items, that is, let me save changes here and just buy them. We would imbue Mystic Expansion probably to Ball, Spirit, all that. That's a 4,000 cost early game. That's a pretty clean amount of souls, actually. I feel like by the time you get out of the early game, you're probably going to be around like 6,000 to 7,000. So you could probably fit one more item in there. Maybe that's where you throw in like a Mystic Slow. Maybe you do get your ult online and you decide to do something with it there. Or maybe, and this is where I think this is important to look at, I would look at getting another item that you need out of the way. And apologies for my dog barking in the background. It's just one of those things. This is where we look at these kind of mid-game vitality items. And in a build like this, where you're going Spirit and the end game goal is to just wreak havoc with your ultimate, I think getting some vitality out of the way in the early game is a really, really valuable thing. So let's look at some of our options that I laid out here. Weapon and Spirit Shielding. These are both really solid items. They do pretty much what they sound. They provide you a shield if you're getting hit by a lot of weapon damage, a lot of spirit damage. This one's really up to you. They both just give out of combat regen. So these are both very reactionary in terms of which one would you buy when. I would always have these in a situational items category down here, even if I really had planned to buy one in the early game. So let's look at the next 2 options. Spirit Lifesteal and Enchanter's Emblem. 2 great 1,600 cost vitality items. Both of them fit with the build. Spirit Lifesteal is going to help you to do what you want to do. Bonus health, spirit power. That sounds awesome, right? In the same way, Enchanter's Emblem is really good. You get some Spirit Resist right away. You get out of combat regen. And then obviously you get bonus spirit and cooldown reduction when you're healthy. So both of these things, especially the cooldown reduction, is really, really valuable for 7 in the early game. And this is, one of those things we talked about with the cooldown item that we compress cooldown right here. This could be a really nice way to replace that in the early game and still give you some ability to cycle your abilities early. So for sake of this build and being pretty simple here, I would go ahead and move Enchanters to the early game and get you another bit of health right away. This is honestly an item that you could even move up and rush as a second item or even like a first item versus getting extra stamina. And I think this is worth talking about right now. Should that just be a call you make? Should we just take out extra stamina because, like we've looked at, this item doesn't really contribute a ton towards what we're trying to do with the ult build. The only argument would be like an Arcane Surge would make the ult bigger, so you could set up like an Arcane Surge in the mid game. I think there's probably better directions to go. So, for sake of doing this kind of as we go, let's sell extra stamina and let's actually go ahead and move Spirit Lifesteal up. That way we have another green item, a little bit more health as we prepare to launch into the mid game and go pretty full on Spirit. All right, so now let's take a look at what we have after we've bought all of our early game items. I think it's 6,400 souls. Let me make sure that's right. Yeah, 6,400. So let's take a look. We have monster rounds, so we have better damage against NPCs. We have a weapon item, so we'll also have some weapon power from that. That'll be great. We'll use that to help our weapon throughout the game. We have enchanters, so we've got great spirit resist. We have better cooldowns. We have some more regen. We have extra spirit, which is just uniformly pretty good. We have improved spirit, which helps us to do more damage. These can also be bought a little bit out of order or maybe a little bit less priority there. We have Spirit Lifesteal for some great Spirit Lifesteal, Spirit Power, health. And then we have Mystic Expansion at the end. So I think when I initially bought it, I put it on Ball. This is one that I feel like, now the more that I've looked at this build, again, this is kind of a live build creator. This is 20% ability range. Greater Expansion is another 2,400. All you get is 10% Spirit Resist, and you get 35% ability range. I feel like the multiple ability isn't really worth it here, so I would actually move this down to kind of like a situational item that you could like optionally upgrade to, and I would actually maybe have this be the first item in your mid game or the last item in the early game, and go ahead and use it on ult. So go ahead and start with a 20% ult ability range bonus right away. Try to time this for right after you've gotten your ultimate. Save the 800 souls, go buy this, and then you're kind of launched into the mid game from there. And then we take a look at what do we have in the mid game. What is our goal of the mid game? So, with this in mind, by the end of the early game, our hope is that you have your ultimate unlocked, you've just given it expansion, you have all these other things, you've invested 3,200 at this point in health, so you're not going to be all that, deadly in terms of damage, but you should be pretty hardy, and you should be ready to go around and start using some ults in some key spots in the map. You should also kind of model your gameplay and time your gameplay around some of this as well. So I would plan on, if you can, at least in a perfect world, you can snag a Guardian with this. You can go gank another lane if you've already won your lane, or you can make maybe a really clutch defense on your own Guardian with this expanded ult that you have. Now let's get into the mid game. For me, for this build, the mid game is kind of like our waiting period. The mid game is like our training arc in an anime. We are getting items that may not feel great immediately, but they are going to contribute mightily towards what we are doing in the late game with our ultimate. So that's where Mystic Vulnerability, I think, becomes a pretty core item here. Let's save change. Let's go ahead and buy that. I think Mystic Slow feels pretty good in this spot as well. And then we have to start asking some questions about these next two. So for Spirit cooldown, should we just go ahead and go for a compressed cooldown instead on the ult, or is this probably worth it on all abilities for 7? I mean, 7's abilities are all pretty good. I mean, the stun is good, ball is good, power surge is good. You're going to be using those throughout the game plenty, especially as you're farming. So we might leave both those on here for now, but at least compressed cooldown to start on ult is pretty good. This you can even go here if it works out, where you are able to use this right after you get done using your ult. So you buy this, use ult, buy this to immediately compress the cooldown on it. That can be a great little play. Same thing for duration extender. I would think this one's pretty safe to go ahead and buy in the mid game. So if we save these changes, we go ahead and buy these two items. Then we have 12,800 souls spent. We are teed up for the late game. All of our items are already building into what they're going to become, as well as some other interesting items down here that I want to kind of look at and talk about. But yeah, this gets us through it, especially if we buy Superior. That puts us at 14,000 souls. That's pretty safely about the halfway point in a lot of Deadlock games. And you already, this only would have required your team to have unlocked one flex slot. That feels pretty reasonable. If you were in a pinch, you could also just sell monster rounds and just kind of, you probably don't really need it at that point. So if you are flex slot hurt, that's a very easy item to sell. I would put an annotation in this that it would be like a sell first kind of item. But at 14k souls, like I said, you're halfway through the game. Now we start looking towards the end game and how we're going to inevitably scale and turn our ult into an absolute devastating machine. All right, so now that we're in the mid game, it's a good time to kind of take an inventory again, just like we did after the early game of where are we in the build. And let's look at this pretty exhaustively if we can. So first off, we have 7% weapon damage from the monster rounds. That's pretty negligible. We can kind of neglect that for right now. We have we're at a nice clean vitality investment of 3.2k. If you aren't familiar, these have kind of benchmarks. You can really maybe faintly see it in the bottom left, but at 2.4k soul investment, you get 13% health increase. At 3.2k, you get 17%. So buying two 1600 items is not just like a haphazard choice. That is getting you very specifically to a benchmark in the game, and that's something we want to try and do if we're being as efficient as possible. Just a nice perk as well. And then in Spirit, we're just a hair over the Spirit investment of 9.6k, which gets us 44 Spirit power. So we're doing good. We're at a really good spot as far as these bars are concerned. We're not like just barely missing something, right? And now we can also, as you're building, it's good to know, you can also hover these tabs to kind of see what you have so far in terms of the build. And I always really look at this Vitality tab in particular because this gives you some pretty important things. Vitality, I feel like, is something that players really overlook when they're doing Spirit builds because they're just so focused on making their Spirit do all this cool stuff. Like we're looking at with these late game items, these are all awesome. But we have to make sure we're not just going to die immediately right away. So The immediate problem with this build is we have no bullet resist. We also have no debuff resist. So if I were to just, impromptu kind of see that and notice it, I would know we have weapon shielding down here, but I would also maybe go ahead and throw debuff reducer down here, especially because we're considering unstoppable anyway. And then you can maybe throw a bullet resist item as well. If you're not familiar, one thing you can do as well is you can type in the search bar, bullet resist, and it will pull up every item with bullet resist on it. So we can kind of look at some items that might stick out. Okay, there's a couple that we would want to pay attention to right away. Cult of Sacrifice. Is that something you want on 7? Probably not. I feel like 7 clears camps really fast, so I would not go for Cultist on him. Superior Duration. That is one that we talked about. I think even though it looks appealing, it really shouldn't be something you probably go for. Honestly, what I would say for this 7 build is I would put Bullet Resilience in the situational section down here. I'm covering it up with my big fat head, but it's there. And I would just have that as a purely counter item, just in case the enemy team has a whole lot of bullet resist. This is going to bug me. I hate when my head covers up things, so I'm just going to move myself there. So yeah, now we're looking at late game. What do we want? We pretty much know what we have in terms of vitality. We're a little bit short on some bullet resist. We have short on debuff resist. We have 22% spirit resist, which is really good. That's going to impact some decisions we make later. And then on the spirit side, we have 25% ability cooldown across the board because of having superior cooldown. And then it doesn't show the ability duration and range because they're imbued, but we also have those on the ultimate. And you can see some of your damage numbers here. If you're trying to kind of measure, like, will it proc such and such thing, you can be able to see those things here. Then we have to finally make the decision, what's our late game buy order? What do we want in the late game? It probably won't just be these 4 items. So inevitably, we have to make some decisions about what other items could be a part of our late game build. What do we need? What do we see as potential weaknesses, etc. I feel like the 4 of these are very safe choices. You're not going to go wrong in an ult game with 7 buying Escalating, Boundless, Lightning Scroll, and Transcendent Cooldown. You're going to be using your stuff more. You're going to get more procs off of all of your items and ability stuff. This is a really great item. I feel like this one's been getting sneakily better and better, whereas some other items got nerfed. Lightning Scroll is great for a lockdown on your ult. You also get some bonus health, which is really nice, but the stun is really the big deal here. Boundless is just a stacked item, even more spirit power, spirit resist, health, regen, and then obviously escalating exposure, even getting us some more spirit resist. So we don't need any more spirit resist. It's pretty clear. So we want to look at some other items that we might have on the table when we're making that call. Namely, there's one that I had in mind as a potential for this build, and it was Witchmail. I wouldn't go Witchmail in this build. It might, you might think, oh, it helps you to get your cooldowns up faster. It could be borderline situational into like an all-out spirit team, but you're probably not looking for Witchmail in this build because you already have so much spirit resist. So then let's look at what are some other items that we have kind of pre-put in the situational section that could get bumped up to a core late game item. I would actually say Unstoppable is a really pretty safe choice. A lot of people have this as like a default. You have to run it in a 7 ult build. I understand why. And honestly, that probably should be the case here. The only one that I sometimes like to use instead is Kevlar because of the ability duration that you get along with it. 15% ability duration can be really nice. After you cast your ult every 64 seconds, which will be every time you use it with 7, you get a barrier and temporary spirit power, 35 spirit power, which when we only have 68 is a ton of spirit power you get from Kevlar, plus a 1000 damage barrier. So, question is Unstoppable or Kevlar? This might be one of those things. I think this is honestly a hard choice for me even. This might just be one of those things that you have to make the call as a player. Are you seeing knockdowns in the enemy team? Are you seeing things that are stunning you out of your ult? If so, go for Unstoppable. If you're just purely taking damage during your ult, go Kevlar. For the sake of this video, let's go ahead and assume Unstoppable is the better play, because it probably just is anyway. And that also means that Debuff Reducer, which we also need debuff reduction, or debuff resist, is also now very much in play and could easily be slotted into your mid-game if you needed another item in the mid-game. Maybe you feel like this is a little too much spirit and you're lacking some vitality through the mid-game. This can be another item that can help you get that that you need, and even tee up this item even more into the late game. Like I said, you don't have to go full components here, and I recognize this is kind of falling into that, but you don't have to do this as the way that you build. Other items that we want to consider, though, would be, like I said, Kevlar still and Leech. For the time being, though, I would actually say that these both can live in the situational section with these other items, because you don't know that you're going to be running them every game. I want them on the build. I'm a smooth brain. I like for my whole build to be on one page. I like to be very easy to understand that these are the items that I am just situationally going for. If I were really being holistic about this, I would also probably add Spirit Resilience here, just in the event that it's like an all-out Spirit team. But like I said, we already have a ton of that coverage anyway. We probably don't need it. So let's assume that these are our core late-game items. You buy them all. That puts you at 38,400. This is certainly doable in Deadlock games. You're probably, however, usually not going to get to all of these items in the late game of Deadlock. You're probably going to get through maybe 3 or 4, and then the game is usually going to end just based on soul count and whatnot. Again, it could always fall a little differently, but like, let's say you bought greater expansion as well. Like, there were some other situational items you opted for. Maybe you went for bullet resist, right? Like, that's where it gets to be. It's a little harder to fit in some of those, all those late game items at the end of the day. Before we get into ability order, because I think that is kind of the last step that I would want to break down, I think we want to do one final stock of where we're at if we, assuming we were to buy all of our late game items, if we complete the build, obviously with ability stuff leveled up as well, where are we? So let's take a look. So on the vitality section, we have a lot of regen, we have a pretty good amount of health, we have a pretty significant amount of spirit resist with 29%, 20% debuff resist, not bad. Spirit, we have 126 spirit power, that's a lot. We have 30% ability cooldown, 16% spirit lifesteal, and a whole bunch of other stuff imbued to our ult. Over here, though, is where we get one thing that I want to take a look at. So we're still at the normal weapon investment. That's pretty static here. I feel like with this one, you could probably go for one more gun item, maybe like a extended mag or something like that, or Titanic magazine. But again, we're kind of starved for slots, so probably not. Vitality, we're at a nice, clean 32% health increase off the 9.6k soul investment. That worked out really nicely, and it's good if you can get right to that bar. You're just getting the most out of your money. This one is where it's kind of a stinker. We are at plus 69, nice. Spirit investment off of 22.4k souls. If we can get to 28.8k, which is the next check mark, which I think is like 1/800 spirit item away. Let me just check. Mystic Burst, not quite. Actually, no, it does. So that puts us at the cap. So we're 1/800 item away. That's unfortunate. But what we can do is, honestly, if I were to be doing this pretty candidly, you can maybe put like an 800 item in a situational slot, or even look at like an upgrade. Maybe this is where the greater expansion upgrade does come into play for you in this game. Now, I will note, let's say we buy this item, there are diminishing returns. So you cap your spirit investment, spirit power increase at plus 81. If you spend more than that on spirit items, like into Oblivion, it's not going to help you with the bonus spirit power there anymore. So there is some diminishing returns on that. There could be some ways to optimize this build even more and to get that, kind of perfectly cleanly in that spot. But I also, you don't want to dismantle the build just to kind of perfect your bars over here. It's just a nice thing to try to do if you can. But let's take a look at abilities and how I'd go about doing the ability order on this. Let's look at ability order now, and this for me is one of the things where I feel like a lot of players get really lost in the sauce here, but I want to simplify this and take out some of the stakes. Remember what we're doing with the build. The build's goal is to get the ult on as fast as possible and make it strong as fast as possible. That's really what we're after with this build. So for simplification's sake, that's what we're going to be after basically as quick as possible. I mean, again, we want the ult as our play in this build, so this is a kind of linear focused build. We don't want to flex too much. We need to look at the other abilities and what they do and pay attention to that, but we are going to look to go ult pretty fast here. So personally, a lot of this comes down to preference and just playing the hero, getting comfortable with kind of the sequence you like for the early game. I probably would tend to go ball and then stun for my first two, and then also get the one charge as fast as possible, and also get the cooldown reduction on the stun as fast as possible. From there, you're going to also unlock Spirit Surge, or Power Surge, rather, and then we'll get the ult as quick as possible from there as well. You could throw one into Power Surge here to reduce the cooldown. That honestly might not be a bad play, and actually, as I say it, I feel like it is a pretty good play, so we will go ahead and do that. And then for me, it is how fast can we reasonably go for the ult. So this kind of represents what we have so far, our early game. This should be all things that we have achieved in the early part of the game. By about this point, we should be here in the build, roughly. Again, this is a little bit rough, estimation-wise, but should be pretty close. Now we're thinking about, in the mid-game, we're buying these items, and which is a pretty long stretch of time. I mean, this is a pretty good chunk of souls. 1,600, 3,200, 48, math. I mean, it goes on from there. 64, whatever. Yeah, right. So you're spending about 10k souls in this mid-game, so you're going to be grinding for a while, farming, whatnot. So you don't have to think about going straight into 1, 2, 3, or 1, 2, 5 ult points and just starve yourself through the mid-game. You have plenty of time to get there. I will say the max level for the ult feels really, really good on 7. It's not essential, but it does feel really good to be able to move around and get some more DPS. So we're for sure doing those first two at the very least. Now the question is, where do you go from here? And let's just, I think the simplest way players should approach the ability side of this is just to read. Read what these things do. So minus 35 move speed from Lightning Ball is pretty good. Stun, 7 meter radius feels pretty bad. 0.9% stun duration doesn't feel great either. Not that big of a priority to me. Power Surge, shock applies minus 15% spirit resist for 8 seconds. And then plus 12 shock damage, improves spirit scaling, and plus 3 jumps. The last one's pretty negligible. But that 2 right there, honestly, to me feels pretty good. I think this is worth it, even before you get max ult, to go ahead and invest in this. Now the question is, and this kind of comes down to the individual, right? A lot of things in these builds will. Do you like the minus 35% move speed? Are you hitting lightning balls? Has this been viable? Or do you just want to save up? Are you around the time now that you go ahead and launch into the ult? Personally, I would say you go ahead and invest in the ult here. Then you get lightning ball. Then from there, it's kind of up to you. It might be worth it just to go ahead and get the 2 static charge to make that a little bit easier to hit. You're going to be somewhat squishy as 7, so maybe you just go for that. And then you probably just go like here, or something of that nature, right? The most important section that we're looking at is right here. Once you have your 5, your max ult, that represents your arguably biggest power spike in the game and should coincide with around this spot or like this spot in the build. Somewhere around here, you should be maxing out your ult and be able to go around and start terrorizing. And then as you're able to do that, maybe you catch one good mid-game fight, you get some kills, you get some souls, you get a walker, you get an urn, you get a mid-boss, like something like that happens. That triggers you to really get into the late game, start buying these items, scale from there. So last thing before we wrap this up is we want to do a full kind of build inventory. And this is genuinely how I go about doing my builds. Look at everything, make sure we haven't missed any obvious items, go back to the drawing board if we have, and evaluate. All right, and to this end, I do think there are some other items we really could consider for this build. I just went through and kind of quickly looked through everything. So I will say with Infuser versus Leech, I generally like Leech better, but for the 7 build with this ult, I mean, you really are getting most of your healing from the ult. So Infuser can make a lot of sense to kind of trigger and then use your ult and use Unstoppable, etc. Kind of go from there. Refresher is another one. Now, this would be, to me, that this item, I think, is incredibly good, especially if all we truly are doing is a 7 ult build. So I would move this into the core. I honestly just forgot about Refresher. That's on me. I forget to use this item sometimes. It really is so good. It just sucks that you get no stats, and it's a 300-second cooldown. It's very feast or famine. I mean, if you use this and you don't get a good 7 ult, it does not feel good to have spent that much money. So I'll put it in the late game core, but I would kind of put it, I might even put an annotation on here, that this might be like a lower prio item, because you really want to establish that your ult can do really consistent damage, and you're also using the Transcendent cooldown to get it as fast as possible anyway. So Refresher feels maybe somewhat overkill, but that being said, 2 really juiced 7 ults back-to-back can be what wins you the game. So it's certainly worth it to have. I also went ahead and put Suppressor and Arcane Surge here. I think we were looking at that Spirit chart earlier, and we were just really close to getting right to that 81. One of these 2 items could be a really easy way to go ahead and get over that hump, and you get a ton of value out of both. Arcane Surge, if you're using it, is really good. You get 15% ability range and duration. You just need to make sure and remember to dash jump right before you ult. And then Suppressor, if you're running into a gun-heavy team, can be a really great supplemental item as well. It also gives you spirit power, gives you bonus health, and like I said, it's not bullet resist, but it is doing a similar kind of thing with fire rate reduction. Obviously, if you're going up against gun heroes where fire rate's really not a problem for them, then maybe not. But in any case, it solves one of our problems in the build, which is a kind of a lack of bullet resist right here. So, all in all, this is a very simple guide for how I would go about building spirit builds in Deadlock. This is just my take. This is how I like to do builds. I like to go very linear, very basic, and have it all on one screen. I've seen some builds that are just, there's a ton of information all over the place. And like I said, for me, I wanted to kind of boil this down into a few specific sections. I'll kind of recap the stages that I would go about doing this. Decide on a hero, first of all, that is spirit-oriented, so don't pick a pure gun hero. So 7's a great choice. Figure out what ability or abilities you're trying to scale. So for this, I'm going for pure ult build. There are other iterations where you could do like a power surge ball build. I had one of my earliest videos was a melee stun 7 build, like a support stun 7. Like, so those are all going to require different things. Ult 7 is what we decided on here. And then what is your late game goal with those abilities? What is like the ultimate idea of this build if it were to go perfectly? And for me, like I said, this is ulting as often as you can with as devastating of results as possible to try and zone out huge areas, clear objectives, etc. This will change based on hero, this will change based on ability, all that kind of stuff. And then obviously the last thing is you do inventory as you go along, and you make sure your ability order kind of lines up with the scope and the goal of the build. All in all, this is a long video, much longer than we usually do on the channel, I apologize, but I want there to be guides on this channel. I mean, it's called Dead Unlocked for a reason. I want the channel to help players kind of unlock how they approach the game, like find new ways to interact with this game, find new ways to play it, get more and more immersed in it. Like, this is almost, to me, like a game within a game. Like, getting good at creating builds and getting comfortable with it will really allow you to approach new hero releases with a pretty clear head and make loading into a game much more clear as to what your objectives are. Because, I don't know about you all, but I've had the experience so many times of I'm ziplining to lane, the game has just started, I'm flipping through the community build screen, I'm like, this one seems like it kind of does what I want, I pick it, and then I look at it and I'm like, oh man, I don't know what this person's trying to go for here, but I'm going to do this because it seems like it achieves generally what I want. That gets old after a while, and it really isn't, I don't think, the best way to play Deadlock. The best way to play Deadlock to me is when you have a very clear build, you know exactly what you're trying to do and when, you know when your power spikes are, you know when you should expect to hit certain things, and you know when you're going to buy certain items and why. This build, or this kind of build structure, to me achieves that. But at the end of the day, I'd be curious for how you all approach builds in Deadlock. This is my way, but it's not the only way. I've seen a lot of other pros with different ideas. There's some older videos. I think one of Poshy Pop's like oldest videos was how he talked about how there's like core items you build and it's a very small number, and then you need to have a lot of situational items around, maybe those 5 to 8 core items. That's kind of what we're doing here. We have a core sequence, but with some kind of like auxiliary items plugged in along the way to get us where we need to go. But this is just my way, like I said. Let me know in the comments what you all think about this. Am I just totally an idiot for the way I build? Am I totally smooth-brained? Let me know. And as always, thank you all so much for tuning in. From our house to yours, we'll see you all next time here at Dead Unlocked.